uh, and you apply it to the Christianity?
Look, let me explain it to you, okay? Suppose I hold to worldview A, and you don't accept worldview A, and you speak to me from a different worldview, and your worldview is B, okay? If you don't accept worldview A, that means you hold to worldview B. You cannot speak of another worldview as a possibility.
Yeah, I get it.
Okay,
But
so
is it right? Is it written in the Bible? What you're saying?
yeah, yes, the Bible teaches that there are no other gods. That the God of the Bible is the only true God. Okay, so basically, the Bible is stipulating A equals A. A cannot equal not A. So in other words, other worldviews they're not actual. They're not possible. There's only one actual ultimacy of reality, and that everything that depends upon that. We're not talking about whether there's a boulder of gold on Mars. Okay? So
Okay.
if you reject the Christian worldview, then all you have to go on is your worldview. You can't say, but what about another worldview? You can't offer that from your worldview, because to offer it from your worldview is a contradiction.
I completely understood. All right.
Okay?
So, what about the dinosaur?
What about the dinosaurs? God created all the basic kinds of animals, and then in the worldwide flood, there was a massive hydraulic catastrophe around the world, wiping out all life and rapidly burying some animals in sediment. And that's where we get the fossils from. Because when animals naturally die, they don't turn into fossils. Their bones rot and decay. In order to have a fossil, you have to have a rapid sedimentation.
So like a meteor.
Yeah, and rapid sedimentation occurs through hydraulic conditions. But you listen, people have been brainwashed because we have all of these lovely looking creatures in a museum called dinosaurs, and we're told that we evolved from all these animals and dinosaurs. Well, dinosaurs must be proof of evolution. They're not. The fossilized remains of all of these creatures that are in museums are completely consistent with a literal Genesis account. It's inconsistent with an evolutionary explanation of the past, but the bones themselves are not inconsistent with the literal Genesis.
Okay, and when you think those dinosaurs died?
Well, according to the Bible, if you go by the genealogies, the Earth is anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 years old. Now, people have been led to believe that radiometric isotope dating is this foolproof scientific way to calculate the age of rocks. It is not. It is based upon a number of unprovable assumptions.
Dang.
For example, what are unprovable assumptions? Carbon happens to expire at a specific rate, and we can measure it.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we're going to discuss that now. Okay.
Well, I mean,
fine.
you made the claim that it's unprovable, so
right,
I'd like you to
right.
prove
Well,
that.
I'll be glad to show that. Well, first of all, okay, without the Christian worldview, can you account that all isotopes decay at the same rate?
Let's say no, but that specific isotope we've calculated.
But the point is you're using induction, that all of the isotopes that we have tested decay at the same rate. Now, the problem here is this. Now, okay, are you familiar at all with radiometric isotope dating?
Hardly, except that we use a specific carbon atom that happens.
You're thinking of carbon dating. Do you know carbon dating is not used to date rocks?
You're right. I can see it. I was thinking of the wrong shit, buddy. I'm sorry.
Okay, so in radiometric isotope dating, what they do is they isolate an isotope in a rock. Okay, now that isotope that they isolate in the rock in a laboratory is called the daughter element. All right. Now, the daughter element is alleged to have decayed over long periods of time from the parent element. You got that?
Yeah.
Right. And so what they do is they say, okay, well, based upon the rate of decay that we see, the constant rate of decay, we can calculate backwards. How do they determine what the precise atomic state of the parent element and its ratios were in the past? How do they do that?
Presumably, they're taking another example that they know to be true.
No. That was a shot in the dark that you just did there. They guess.
Yeah, I know nothing about that.
They assume what the parent element is, because how do you know what the parent element is unless you had a time machine? You don't.
Rock.
Right. Now, here's another problem. Radiometric isotope dating assumes that rocks, which are porous, are not contaminated by groundwater. Groundwater carries isotopes in it. Okay? So you see, this is the dirty little secret that you see, people are brainwashed because the scientific community and academia has been taken over by people who hold to metaphysical naturalism and philosophical naturalism. Okay? It is a secular religion masquerading as science. Right? And so because it has a stranglehold in academia, people think, oh, well, it comes in the name of science. Science put us on the moon. Therefore, if a scientist tells me a rock is 1.5 million years old, it must be 1.5 million years old. Do you know that there have been tests on rocks of known ages, that have rocks that have cooled from lava flows from known volcanoes, and that they have tested as being very, very old when they're not old? They've tested rocks from Mount Vesuvius, and they've dated them at millions of years old. Mount Vesuvius is only 2,000 years old. Okay? Now,
But-
We move on.
so now I'm going to ask you a question, Oliver. Oliver, what would you say about the reliability of radiometric isotope dating if the Earth was instantaneously created, everything including memories 2 months ago? Would that make radiometric isotope dating in terms of its assumptions false?
Yes. That's my
Oliver?
I'll go with that answer. Yes.
Okay, now, can you prove scientifically that the Earth and everything in it, including our memories, wasn't created 2 months ago? The answer is no. Now, I'm not suggesting
gonna
that.
say
I'm not suggesting that. But that's a metaphysical position that you consider unworthy of belief. Now, let's change the scenario now. Let's say the Earth was created along with its current topography 1,000 years ago. Would that mean that radiometric isotope dating is wrong because of its assumptions? Yes. Now let's change the scenario again. Let's say the Earth was created less than 10,000 years ago. So you see, in order to believe in radiometric isotope dating methods, you have to assume that the Earth is the product of eons and eons of purely materialistic succession. But you see, that assumption is not scientifically verifiable. It's a fundamental starting point that is faith-based. Okay? So radiometric isotope dating is actually faith-based, even though it maintains its science.
But that nobody can believe that. Like, I mean, even if you're right,
Okay,
there is
Shinton,
no chance.
Shinton,
That's not what he's saying.
let me explain something to you, right? In 1 Thessalonians, okay? Here, instead of quoting it, let me read it to you so I get the wording correctly, okay? Just give me a minute. I'm going to read this to you.
I know what you're saying.
Wait, Shinton, go to DMs, bro.
Shut up.
What? I'm just saying DM me, idiot.
Oh, okay. What the fuck, man?
What?
Okay, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, this is in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Okay, it says in the end times, because mankind is increasingly turning from God as the creator, mankind worships the creation rather than the creator. Okay, in other words, the earth isn't the product of a creator. The earth is just simply the product of purely materialistic events. This is what science would have you to believe. Now, the Bible says this in the end times. It says, before the rise of the Antichrist, it says, for this reason, God will send them a deluding influence, believe what is false, or the lie, okay, in order that they may be judged who did not believe the truth, okay?
Mhm.
The lie in the Bible is a satanic deception that affects a significant portion of humanity and in end times will influence much of humanity to worship the creation. In other words, to attribute to the material universe that it and it alone is responsible for our being here rather than a creator. And the Bible says God will send, and that's the way that's expressed is God providentially allows this deception to occur to mankind, to those who did not love the truth. Okay? Now, the reason why the theory of evolution and the idea that the universe is old and the earth is old has taken over all over Western civilization is not because it's science. It's actually a deluding influence that God has permitted. It is a satanic delusion, but because it becomes explained in scientific terms, people think, well, science put us on the moon, therefore scientists wouldn't steer us wrong. These are men of truth, right? These aren't men who are biased by religious opinion. Oh, yes, they are. Everybody has religious opinions and religious biases. So the point is, if radiometric isotope dating would be wrong if the Earth was instantaneously created 1,000 years ago, but you don't have any reason to believe that. But the same would be true if the Earth was created 10,000 years ago. But in order to believe in radiometric isotope dating and other dating methods, you have to first assume that the Earth is the product of eons of time. That the rocks that we see are the product of eons of purely materialistic changes. Well, that's not science. It may sound like science because it's expressed in materialistic terminology, but it's not science. It is a materialistic religion pretending to be science. Do you understand?
Mhm.
And I can assure you, if materialism in terms of cosmology and the origin of the Earth had not taken over, you wouldn't be believing it right now. The reason why you believe it is because it's dominant. It's because it has a stranglehold in schools and colleges and universities. And because they claim it's science, not religion. But it's not science. It's materialistic religion with the vocabulary of science. Okay? You see, the theory of evolution, the more you study it, it's a very bad scientific theory. It's terrible. It has so many holes in it, it isn't funny. But and basically there's no agreement about the theory of evolution other than the fact that it happened. Well, why do they believe it? Because modern science is absolutely committed to materialism. That the origin of the universe, that the origin of man, the origin of the earth is purely from materialistic occurrences and not of a creator. That is every much a religious metaphysical view as the Genesis account of creation is.
But why can't the creator be made by materialistic things?
Well, the Christian God is eternal. He doesn't have a cause. The point I'm trying to make to you is Western civilization has been brainwashed in the name of science, and that you cannot question the high priests of science. Now, when it comes to observation, testing, and repeatability, and where they can make successive predictions, right? Where if you put a gun to your head and you pull the trigger, you're going to die, okay? Then it kind of makes sense. But when we're talking about the past, how are they able to rule out that creationism is false? No, they're not. But then they will turn around and say, well, creationism has been falsified. Why? Because they believe that the earth is old. That's why.
But there are old Earth creationists. Are
Yeah,
they
right,
incorrect
right.
as well?
Well, the problem is they're acquiescing to the materialistic metaphysics. They are what we would call syncretists. Have you ever heard of the term syncretism?
I haven't.
Okay, a syncretist is somebody who combines two or more outlooks into one. Okay, so what they're doing is they're paying lip service to God as creator. Okay, and they may even pay lip service to Christianity, but they're rejecting what the Bible clearly says, and they're accepting the modern materialistic retrodiction about the past. Okay, nobody can see into the past. They have to interpret things in the present, say, well, these things that we observe in the present mean this in the past.
But the Bible does not necessitate a young Earth, does it?
I say it does. Okay, let's start with Genesis chapter 1. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? First verse in the Bible, in the beginning, okay? And then it tells us what happened on day one. It says, there was evening and morning the first day, okay? Now, every time the Hebrew word for day, yom, is used with an ordinal, meaning one first day, and it's accompanied by evening and morning, it always means a normal 24-hour period. So those people who want to say, well, the days represent long periods of time, they're going to have to circumvent the ordinal and the evening and morning and say, oh, well, that's just figurative. Well, based upon what? Because you believe in an old earth? Because you believe the consensus of science? Okay, anyone who studies at a graduate level the philosophy of science knows all too well that a consensus opinion in science is notoriously wrong and is not infallible. Now, so we have, in the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. We have day one, we have day two, and then what happens on day 5 goes. We have the creation of Adam and Eve, right?
Right.
Now, when we're talking about the first 7 days, the Bible says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's a generalization. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then it starts to specify the generalization. Here's what happened on day 1. Here's what happened on day 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? And then when we go on to Genesis 2, then we have a zooming in as to what happened with man. Now, let's now go to Matthew 16. Jesus was debating with the Pharisees and Sadducees about the issue of divorce. And they tried to trap him. They said, well, why did Moses command a man to give a certificate of divorce? Well, first of all, Moses never commanded that, okay? They added that. But what did Jesus say to them in response? He says, do you not know that he who made them in the beginning, male and female? What's that a reference to, Goose?
That's a reference to the creation. But...
Right. He said, do you not know that he, meaning God, made them? Who is that? It's Adam and Eve. In the beginning. If the 6 days of creation are eons of time, and I mean literally eons of time, then how did Jesus Christ, who is the Lord of glory, the creator of all things, say that Adam and Eve were made in the beginning when they were the product of a tail end of literally billions of years?
I see what you're saying. But even so, say the earth was created in a week. does that necessitate that it is 6 to 10,000 years old? I mean, mankind could have been on the earth for 10 million years.
No. You're not understanding it, because when we start with Adam and Eve, and we look at the genealogies and the chronologies, even allowing that the genealogies aren't necessarily fill every single generation, okay? That it's approximate. You only have between 6 and 10,000 years. Okay. Now here's another problem. If we say that the Earth has been around for eons of an evolutionary period, okay, and Adam and Eve are at the tail end of these eons of time, then what we have is death and suffering before the creation of man. Now, what did the Lord say about the creation on day 6? He said he saw everything and it was very good. Now, if there was death and suffering over eons of time, over the so-called 6 elongated periods of time, then God is saying that death and suffering was very good. So the people who are old Earth creationists have to avoid this passage. How can death and suffering be very good? How about in the New Testament where it says death will be swallowed and be cast into the lake of fire? God will eliminate death. Why would God eliminate something that is very good in the future? Because it wasn't good. Will there be any suffering in the new creation? No, there won't. Why? What does the Bible say why suffering and death came into being? It's because of the fall of man. It was a temporal judgment on man and this planet.
So I'm going to recap a little bit just to make sure I have a good understanding.
And by the way, we know each other, so I don't mind if you disagree, because I know that even though if you and I disagree on certain points, I know that you're intellectually honest and you're not a liar like some of the people we encounter around here. So I mean, so feel free to disagree. I'm not going to bite your head off.
Yeah, so mankind is created on the 6th day, in a 24-hour period. Even then, and you mentioned the gene pool of the human race, and you said that only accounts for the human race being around for about 6,000 years. Is that correct?
No, I didn't say the gene pool. I said the genealogies.
Could you go into more detail on that? I'm not quite sure.
We can compile the genealogies from Jesus, from Adam to Moses and onward. Okay, so even if we allow that there are some skipped generations, we're not. It's not going to be any more than 10,000 years, approximately. Okay, it's not going to be tens of thousands of years or hundreds of thousands of years. That's why creationists say the Earth is anywhere from 6 to 10,000 years old. The reason why people are old Earth creationists is because they are absolutely intimidated by the stranglehold in the scientific community about the retrodiction that the Earth is old. People are absolutely intimidated. Oh, we can't challenge science. Well, these conclusions are not testable, repeatable, and observable. We're not talking about doing calculations about the rate, acceleration, and pull of gravity on objects, like getting a man to the moon. You see, people think that the high priests of science have been so right in making medicines, curing certain problems, making cell phones, and putting men on the moon. They couldn't possibly be wrong about the age of the Earth. Oh, yes, they can.
So, with biblical genealogies and the creation account, the Earth in the creation theory, cannot be more than 10,000 years old.
I think if one denies that, then one will have to contradict a number of statements in the Old and New Testament.
That's something I haven't given much thought to, but you have a point.
And remember, Jesus said, "Do you not know that he made them male and female in the beginning?" Now, who are we to trust? Jesus Christ, who is omniscient, who created Adam and Eve? Or are we going to trust scientists and all their collective genius? See, people say, oh, well, one scientist could be wrong, but surely tens of thousands of scientists could be wrong. Oh, yes, they can. Especially if they're committed to a purely materialistic account of origins.
But Darth, for people who have been raised in the public school system today, they've been hearing the age of the Earth is millions of years old since kindergarten.
I know. They've heard that dogma. And it is dogma.
It really does make you think, though.
Yeah. Well, let's take, for example, the Grand Canyon, right? There are so many evolutionary things that we have been told that have been debunked, and it just gets swept under the rug. Here's one quick example, right? Well, you know what? There are signs of evolution that we can see it, like we have an appendix. The appendix is a vestigial organ from our evolutionary past. Well, why did they say that? It's because they first had an a priori assumption that creationism and or intelligent design is false. Number two is because the appendix seemed to be useless. So they say, oh, well, it doesn't serve any function. It must be vestigial. It's a holdover from evolution. But that's been debunked. It's a part of the immune system, both in utero and in after embryological development. It's a reservoir of beneficial bacteria, so that the gut is constantly being filled up with beneficial bacteria. So it's not vestigial. And then they'll do double talk. They'll say, oh, well, you see, it used to have some other function, but it acquired a new one. You see, they just make this stuff up as they go along.
So can we claim solidly that the Earth has existed for 10,000 years after the creation of Adam and Eve? Can we claim that solidly?
We can claim, if we accept that the Bible is the inerrant, infallible, inspired word of God, we can confidently claim, based upon God's eyewitness, that the Earth is young rather than old. Whether it's 6 and anywhere between 10,000 years is a matter of discussion. But that the Earth is hundreds of thousands or millions or billions of years old, that doesn't come from science. That comes from materialistic assumptions that they just accept by faith.
So would you say it is impossible from your worldview that it is hundreds of thousands of years old?
If a Christian believes that the Earth is old rather than young, in my view, they are contradicting what the Bible clearly teaches. Now, are there some Bible-believing Christians who say, "Oh no, an old Earth is compatible with Genesis"? Take William Lane Craig, one of the world's great Christian philosophers and theologians, a man who I greatly respect. I've learned an enormous amount from him. I have still yet to learn a lot. He holds to this idea.
How does he justify it?
Yeah, that's what I'd like to know. Well, the answer is, he said, because Genesis doesn't require it. I beg to differ. I think it's as plain as the nose on my face when it says there was a first day, evening and morning. God could not have made it more clear that he created the world in 6 days. Even Moses said the Lord created the world in 6 days. Now, was Moses meaning, oh, well, God created the world in 6 days, long periods of time. No. The reason why people hold that the earth is old because they're bowing down to the materialistic retrodiction of scientists. Because after all, we can't question scientists, can we? Do you know, several years ago, I used to debate a lot more about evolution, and a topic that used to come up all the time was peer review, peer review, peer review, peer review, peer review. And where are the peer-reviewed articles by the creationists? Where are the peer-reviewed articles by the intelligent designers? Well,
NIDC.
do you know that if you Google the problems with peer review, there are huge problems with the peer review process? Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't have peer review in journals and articles. It can be very beneficial. But peer review is not quote the gold standards, because there are articles that are bogus, that the data is fudged and it gets in there. Okay, so all I'm just simply saying to you is people have been propagandized by the dogma of an old earth, and they think what they're getting is science. It's not really science. It's a metaphysical retrodiction, a materialistic retrodiction posing as science.
Don't you think that if we all think the same way as you are, it will slow the science progress?
No, that's a charge that evolutionists make. They say that it's a science stopper. Let me show you how the opposite is true. Okay, let's take the human. You ever heard of the Human Genome Project?
Absolutely.
Okay, now Francis Collins, who is a professing Christian, headed up the Human Genome Project. Now, somebody who's the head of the Human Genome Project and a professing Christian who believes in evolution is probably somebody whose credentials dealing with genetics is not something we would question. Okay, the guy got the job because he was more than qualified for it. In his book, DNA, the Language of God, he basically taught that much of the human genome is junk, that it's simply an accumulation of mutations over millions of years. Okay? Now, that conclusion was only made because they're committed to a materialistic, mechanistic evolutionary descent. Well, if we're the product of purely materialistic mechanistic descent, and 80% of the human genome doesn't code for proteins, and we don't know what the rest of the stuff is, surely it's junk, just like the appendix is a vestigial organ. Well, guess what? That turns out to be wrong, because the ENCODE project was a project trying to investigate the non-protein coding regions of human DNA to see if they had highly regulatory functions, and it turns out they did. And so what was considered to be useless accumulation of genetic material, junk DNA, and they actually called it
introns. Just a quick question.
No. I'm just simply talking about the non-protein coding regions of DNA. Because they didn't code for proteins, they you see, the scientists thought, because of their evolutionary background, that the only functional coding sequences were the ones that coded for proteins, because the building blocks of life are proteins. But you see, if they had a non-evolutionary view, if they had a creationist or an intelligent design viewpoint, they would say, wow, 80% of the human genome doesn't code for proteins, but we start from the supposition that there's an intelligent designer or the God of the Bible. So maybe these regions aren't that they're not useless. We just haven't discovered what importance they are. Okay.
What about the brain?
Let me just finish.
Like, we don't use.
So it turns out, yeah, I know that stuff. People say we only use 10%. That's pop psychology. Okay.
Can you talk about that after?
Yeah, sure. I'll be able to discuss that. Okay. So the evolutionary position was actually the science stopper, because had it not been for other researchers that rejected that notion, they never would have been trying to see if the non-protein coding regions of human DNA, which comprise well over 80% of the human genome, was actually important. Okay? And we may find out in the very near future that those non-protein coding regions are a solution to either embryological development problems or cancers or things like that. So you see, the evolutionary assumptions actually produce the science stopper. You don't say, well, just saying God did it is a science stopper. No, it's not. Not at all. It's just that people who hold a different dogma of origins always want to disparage those who don't share their dogma of origins. So, and this has happened in the history of science. People who have competing paradigms about the world of science have always accused the other paradigm as not being scientific. And you don't have to check out, believe me on that. Go check out The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. And he points this out because science has always been a battle of paradigms, not individual accumulation of discoveries. How about the Big Bang cosmology? Do you know that Christians, before the modern advent of cosmology, always maintained that the universe had a beginning? Well, this was rejected by the scientists. They said, oh, no, the universe has always been. It's a steady state theory. So it's just people who believe in faith because the Bible told them the universe had a beginning. But the universe has always been. But now in the 20th and 21st century, with more and more discoveries, they realize that the so-called scientific commitment that the steady state theory doesn't hold up against the evidence. And now they accept that the universe had a beginning, just like the Bible-thumping Christians said it did. Now, that doesn't mean they're accepting creationism and that it had a beginning with a God. But what they ridiculed as a faith-based position, they are now hold to in part. You know, so you have to be careful. What people tell you is science. Well, are we talking about something that is observable, testable, and repeatable, like dropping a baseball or firing a bullet and finding out the velocity of it and its trajectory? Or are we talking about looking at bones and telling us how the bones got here? You see, just because it comes in a materialistic, mechanistic explanation, that doesn't make it science.